Hello everyone, I'm Talon the Tech Merc, and this is the first installment in the new series I'm starting called How to Home Lab. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at how to set up Paperless-ngx. Paperless-ngx is a self-hosted document manager that uses cool things like OCR to make it easy to find and manage your documents. I'll be walking through two things. One is just how to set up Paperless-ngx specifically in Unraid, and then how to configure it to work behind Authentik so that you can have an identity provider and an internal SSO that is self-hosted. I'll have chapters down below for each of these, so if you're just interested in how to set up Paperless-ngx on Unraid, I'll make sure that that is clearly marked, and if you're interested just in how to set up the Authentik side of things, then I'll have that marked with a chapter down below also. But let's just go ahead and get right into things. The first item of business is to talk a little bit more about what Paperless-ngx is and why you might consider self-hosting it. Paperless-ngx is a document manager, so it hosts all of your documents on your own server, which gives you complete control and ownership of all of your data. It also uses OCR, or optical character recognition, to allow you to do full text searches of your documents. So if you remember things that are in a document, but you don't remember what the document is called, you can search based off of the contents of what is in there instead of having to remember tags or the title of that document. It also uses the Open Tesseract engine, so it can recognize up to 100, maybe even more languages here in the future, and uses machine learning to automatically add tags and correspondence and other important metadata information to your documents instead of requiring that stuff manually. The last cool part is that you can set it up to work with email ingests, so it can automatically grab documents that you email or that are emailed to you. This is a very, very powerful tool, especially if you're a small, medium business owner that handles a lot of documents or correspondence with different service providers, different clients, and things like that. Having all of this self-hosted and easy to search could be a huge boost.
So the first step here for installing Paperless-ngx is actually going to be setting up the file structure. So we're going to do that by going to the shares in Unraid and then hitting add share. So I'm going to call this one Paperless-ngx-test. I already have an instance of Paperless-ngx running and I don't want to interfere with it. So I'm just going to call this one test for purposes here. If you have an SSD cache, you'll likely want to set up your primary storage to be cache and your secondary storage to be array. That way, when you're writing data, it will write fast because it's writing to the cache. And then when it's a little bit slower, it will move from the cache to your array. So when you have that configured, however you would like, hit add share and then done. Inside this share, we need to create 3 folders: consume, export, and media. So I'm going to do that right now by hitting create. And then in new folder name, I'm going to type consume, media, and export. So after I have those 3 folders, the next thing I'm going to do is going and installing Redis. So to do that, I'll go to the apps tab, wait for the content to update, and then type in Redis. Then you'll want to install the official container for Redis. Do that just by hitting the install button here. Now, because I already have other instances of Redis, I'm getting this warning saying that the port that Redis uses by default is already in use. You might not have this problem, but if you do, I'll show you how to fix it here in a moment. If it does pop up, just hit OK. And then once we're in the configuration for the container, the first thing that I'm going to do is rename my container to Redis-Paperless-ngx-test. That just lets me know if I have other versions of Redis or other containers of Redis running, what this one particularly is for. Just helps me keep things organized. And then the only other thing that you have to configure here is this Redis port. So I got a warning earlier saying that this container might use ports that are already in use. In order to check that, what I'm going to do is hit Control F, and I'm going to copy and paste this default port and search for it on this page after I've extended this Show Docker Allocations button. What this does is shows you all of the ports that are currently in use by your different Docker containers. As you can see, I have another Redis instance already running that uses the same default port, but it looks like maybe 6383 is available for me to use. So that's the one that I'm going to use. I'm going to go 6383 right here. And just as a sanity check, I'm going to make sure it doesn't exist anywhere else. And boom, right there is our 1 of 1. After you get a port that is open on your server, just go all the way down and hit apply. After it says this command finished successfully, you can hit done. And then if you go back to your Docker tab, you're going to see, it should probably be up at the top of the list. You will see right here, this Redis Paperless-ngx test. So we have those first two things done for installing Paperless-ngx. The last thing is going to be actually getting the Paperless-ngx container. So if I go back to apps and I type in here Paperless-ngx, and then install this one. Again, I already have another version of Paperless-ngx installed. So for me, I'm gonna hit actions and then install second instance. If you don't have Paperless-ngx yet, it should just be the normal install button there. I'm gonna get this warning again because I have the default port being used, but I'm just gonna hit OK and change that here in a moment. So I'm gonna rename this one again, just so I can keep it separate from the other Paperless-ngx instances that I have. I'm gonna call this one Paperless-ngx-1-test. And then I'm gonna have to set a port that isn't in use. So again, to check that, I'm just gonna take this 8000, put it up in my search, and then hit the show Docker allocations so that I can see, yep, my other Paperless-ngx is actually using port 8000, and I have another container I was testing some things with earlier that's using 8001. So I'm going to be super creative and just go 8002 and then make sure that that one is actually open, and boom, 1 of 1 right there. That means it's not anywhere else. Here is where it's going to store its app data. So again, because I already have an instance of Paperless-ngx, I'm going to go test right there, but yours should be fine to leave it as default. Now we have media, consumption, and export. So these are the three folders that we made earlier in our new share. And in order to find those ones, you can just click on this and it will pop up a little browse menu here for your file structure. And I'm gonna go Paperless-ngx test, and this one is media, so I'm gonna leave it at media right there. And then I'm gonna do the same thing here for consumption. Mine is called consume. And then export, again, same thing, and then just hit the export button instead. So those are the three folders that we made earlier. The next thing that we're gonna have to configure is the Redis. So Paperless-ngx is going to look to the Redis container that we just made for all of its data storage and file structures and things like that. So you'll want to replace it here, this replace with IP, with whatever the IP was of your instance of Redis. For me, I'm gonna go back to Docker and I'm just gonna look for it. So right here, this Redis Paperless-ngx-test, I can go to this LAN IP port, and I'm just gonna copy and paste this right in here and make sure there's not a space between the // and the IP address. And then all of the rest of this, you can just leave as its default. And then whenever you've got that set up, you'll just hit apply and wait for the commands to run. When it's hit the command finish successfully, go ahead and hit done and go back to your Docker tab. Once you're back in here, you should see your Paperless-ngx instance. And if you want to hit into the web UI, you can click on the little icon here and hit the web UI. And then this is your first time use setup. So create a user here for whatever you would want. We'll just go test user. And then since email is optional, I'm just gonna skip that and go test-password right here, just because I don't plan to keep this container around, and then hit sign up. And then boom, you've got Paperless-ngx up and running, all awesome. So this guide is meant to show you how to set up Paperless-ngx, not how to use Paperless-ngx. Document storage and service and all of that stuff is kind of a science in and of itself. So I'll link some resources down below that might help you get started with creating documents or setting up flows and things like that in Paperless-ngx. That's just a little bit out of the scope of this video, but down in the description, there will be more information for you.
So those are the basics of setting up Paperless-ngx on your Unraid server. Again, if you want a more detailed description or explanation of how to use Paperless-ngx, I'll leave some resources down below. Now, let's talk about how to set up Paperless-ngx behind Authentik so that you can have Authentik for extra security and login. As a prerequisite for this part, I expect that you already have an instance of Authentik up and working, and that you're familiar with what its IP address is and some of that other information. You can get it pretty easily, but as a prerequisite, you need to have Authentik installed and working. But let's go into the specific configuration for setting up Authentik to work as the login for Paperless-ngx?
The first thing that we're going to want to do is get into our Authentik instance. So just click on the icon and hit Web UI, and then go to the admin interface if you're already logged in. Once you're here at the admin interface, you're going to want to go to Applications, and then Create with Provider. So what this does is it will create the application and the provider, which are the two things that Authentik needs in order to work behind a separate application. For the name here, I'm going to type in Paperless-ngx-test. So since I already have a production version of this, I'm calling it test. You can call it whatever you would like, and then hit next. Here in choose a provider type, we're going to use OAuth 2 and OpenID provider. So click on that and then click next. And next comes a little bit more of a dense part, which is the configuring the provider. So I like to just leave the default name because that's easy. And then whenever possible, I try to use the default provider authorization explicit consent. And then we're going to also need to remember our client ID and our client secret, because we'll use both of those things later when we're configuring things on the Paperless-ngx side. I'll also show you how to grab those later in case you don't copy them now. Next, we're also going to add our redirect URI. So that is going to be based off of this template. You're going to have to change a part depending on how you have Paperless-ngx set up. If you have it behind a reverse proxy, or you have it as a published application through a Cloudflare tunnel or something like that, you're going to replace this paperless.company section with whatever the web address is to your instance. Since I don't have anything externally facing for this test, I'm going to go back over to Docker and Unraid, and I'm going to copy this LAN IP and port. And I'm going to put that right in here and make sure that there are no spaces here. And also, because I don't have this outward facing towards the internet, I don't need HTTPS because I'm not doing the encryption. So I'm just going to have this be an HTTP. Again, if you have this exposed to the internet, you'll want it to be the HTTPS and then whatever the address is to your instance of it. Next, we're also going to want to come down here to the advanced protocol settings. There are a few changes that we need to make here too. We are going to, in the scopes, we're going to add or make sure that it is added 3 things. We're going to need the OpenID email, OpenID, and profile. So if those are all there, then great. If not, you're going to find them here on the left and select them, and then hit this little arrow to move it over to the selected scopes. But everything was set up by default for me properly here. So then I'm just going to go ahead and hit next. Here, in case you have a more complicated Authentik setup for certain groups or users having access to certain applications, you'll want to bind those here. That's a little bit outside the scope of what I'm doing right now. So I'm just going to leave it blank and then hit next. You're going to have a chance to review everything here. Everything looks good on my end. So I'm just going to hit submit, and then boom, my application and provider in Authentik have been created. The next step is to configure all of this on the Paperless-ngx side. So let's get into that. All right, let's get things configured on the Paperless-ngx side of the equation. As a note, an important note, down in the description below, I will link the official documentation that Authentik has for how to configure their service with Paperless-ngx. So I'm going to be copy and pasting some things, and there'll be kind of some long strings. So don't worry too much about typing exactly what I've got typed out. Instead, go to the link in the description to get the copy and paste. I'm going to run through it really quick here, just in case it's helpful to someone, but all of that information will be kind of below. So the first thing you're going to want to do is pop into your Paperless-ngx container. You do that by clicking the little hyperlink, and then we are going to be messing around with this add another port, variable, label, or device. So the first thing that we're going to add is Paperless enable all auth. So this is creating a new variable that basically tells Paperless-ngx, hey, you're going to use an actual authentication service, and make sure to set these 2 variables. And then hit add. The next one is Paperless apps. So we're going to, again, add another variable here, type in Paperless apps, and then this string, again, all of this will be available in the description. And then we're going to hit add. The next one is kind of the big, kind of important one. So it's these 2 basically tell Paperless-ngx that it's going to use a separate authentication service. and then we have to configure what that authentication service is and how it can use it. So what I like to do is just in a text editor, I'm going to paste the template that Authentik gives us and then go through and replace the parts that I need to replace. So the first thing I'm going to need to replace is this client ID. So I do that by going to the provider in Paperless-ngx, or in Authentik for Paperless-ngx. So this is my provider. You get that by going to providers and then down to Paperless-ngx. Mine is called test. And then one of the first things you're going to see is this client ID. So copy that, and then in your text editor, just paste it here where the client ID goes. And then to get the client secret, we're going to hit the edit button and then get the client secret here. Make sure to check this I, otherwise it won't let you copy it. And then back to our text editor, we're going to paste that in right there. The next part you're going to have to configure is this server URL. So this is the URL for Authentik. So right here, this authentik.company is just a placeholder. So you would put whatever your Authentik instance is. In my case, I just happen to know because I've done this a few times. It's 192.168.0.246. And then the port is 9,000. So I'm not exposing this to the internet. That's why I'm pointing it to the internal local IP address. If you did have this exposed to the internet, you would just use the URL of whatever your Authentik URL is. Importantly, also, we have this application slug. So that is a way for Authentik to know which application it's using. In order to get that in Authentik, we go to applications, and then this Paperless-ngx test in my case, and then hit edit, and then right here, it will tell you what the slug is. So I'm just going to copy that, go back to my text editor, and then throw it right in the section that it says application slug. So now that I've got all of this configured, I'm going to copy it all and put it in a variable here back in our container. So again, set this to variable, and then the variable name is paperless social account providers. And then all of the other values here, I'm just going to copy and paste and fill out the key value and default value, and then hit add. And you should have something that looks like that, but with your client secret and ID and slug and all of that. We've got 3 more variables to add, so I'm just going to go rapid fire here. One of them is paperless auto login, which will automatically log in users if they have already logged into Authentik in their web instance. And then this next one is called paperless auto create. So if you have a user that has an Authentik account, but they haven't used Paperless-ngx before, this will automatically create a user in Paperless-ngx for them based off of their Authentik user. So we're going to add that. And then finally, the last thing we've got here is this paperless logout redirect URL. So we're going to paste that in there, and it is another one of those that I'm going to configure in a text editor. So I'm just going to paste this in right here. And again, you're going to have to change this authentik.company to whatever your Authentik URL is. I just so happen to remember mine because I've been doing this for a little bit. I've messed it up so many times that now I've remembered it. And then we're going to have to get our application slug in there also. So we are going to go back here and just copy our slug, same as before, in our text editor, and then we will go right in there and then copy all of this and put it as the key value and default value for that last variable. After you've got all of these done, go ahead and hit apply and wait for the container to fully update. Okay, the command has successfully finished. Now everything should be working. So if you were able to configure everything correctly, you should get a login screen that now looks like this, where you can either log into Paperless-ngx normally, or you have this option to sign in via Authentik. Again, please follow the official documentation from Authentik that I have in the description down below. If you run into any issues, just make sure that you're being methodical with how you're copying and pasting that information and setting it up, and hopefully it works for you.
And that's it. That's a simple setup of Paperless-ngx, and then also how to do it behind Authentik. I hope you found this video interesting and helpful. And if you have a particular application that you'd like me to take a look at doing a guide for in the future, please let me know in the comments down below. Also, if you did find this helpful, please consider subscribing and liking this video. It really helps a lot and helps me make more of this content for you. That's about all I've got for you. We'll see you in the next one. Ciao.